The bar was a crush of bodies, the air thick with gin and cheap ambition. I stood trapped against the mahogany rail. Julian, a confident associate, leaned into my personal space, boxing me in. "Come on, Freya," he slurred. I tried to shrink away, but the crowd pressed in. Then a hand slammed onto the bar with terrifying precision. The noise died. Remy Vance stood there, cutting through the smoke. Julian stammered, "Just discussing the paperwork." Remy stepped closer, the air turning to ice. Her voice dropped low and dangerous. "She's not here for the paperwork," she said. "She's here for me." To understand the weight of that claim, you have to understand the architecture of our world. Sterling and Vance wasn't just a law firm. It was a glass-walled ecosystem of predators and prey. As a first-year intern, I was the latter. I spent my days in windowless bullpens, drowning in discovery documents, invisible to the partners who walked past us like we were furniture. But Remy Vance was different. She didn't walk. She swept through the corridors with a lethal grace that made the air change pressure. She was the lead attorney, a woman of terrifying intellect and cold, striking beauty. I had spent 3 weeks trying to make myself small whenever she was near. It was an exercise in futility. Remy was a gravitational force. When she entered a room, the silence that followed was heavy, charged with a mix of fear and reverence. My desk was situated just outside her office, a strategic purgatory where I could see her silhouette pacing behind the frosted glass, dictating briefs with a precision that bordered on art. Julian represented the mundane brutality of the firm. He was the kind of man who mistook my professional politeness for an invitation, dumping his workload on my desk with a wink. "Pay your dues, Freya," he would say, dropping a stack of files that smelled of stale toner. He was a nuisance, an obstacle I had to navigate daily. But the hours leading up to the bar had shifted everything. It was late, the office humming with the quiet, electric tension of a deadline. I was alone in the library, surrounded by towers of case law. The scent of old paper and espresso thickened my throat. I didn't hear her approach. I only felt the sudden awareness of being watched, a prickle of heat at the back of my neck. "You're doing his work again." Remy's voice was a low hum that vibrated in the quiet room. I looked up. She was leaning against the doorframe, holding a file. She looked exhausted, but in the way a wolf looks tired after a hunt. Alert. Dangerous. "I'm just being thorough," I lied. "You're being exploited." She walked into the room, and the space suddenly felt too small. She stopped at my table, her fingers tracing the edge of a law book. The proximity was dizzying. I could smell her perfume, something complex, like sandalwood and rain. Julian is a mediocrity who relies on the competence of women he deems beneath him. Don't let him make you a habit. "I don't have much of a choice. I'm just the intern." "You're only an intern if you act like one." Her gaze held mine, unflinching. For a moment, the hierarchy collapsed. It wasn't boss and subordinate. It was just the heavy, undeniable pull between two people in a quiet room. "We're going to the docket for drinks. The case is closed. Leave this." "I can't." "Freya." She said my name like it was a verdict. That wasn't a request. She turned and left, leaving me breathless in the silence. My admiration for her, which I had categorized as professional respect, was bleeding into something far more dangerous. It was a physical ache, a desire to be seen by her, to be close to that terrifying brilliance. The transition to the bar was jarring. The docket was loud, chaotic, a stark contrast to the cool sterility of the office. I tried to stay on the periphery, clutching my drink, watching Remy hold court in a booth near the back. She had removed her blazer, and the sight of her bare arms, the way she gestured with her wine glass, felt illicit. I was captivated, my guard down. That was when Julian found me. He slid into my space, his movements loose with alcohol. He didn't see me as a colleague. He saw me as an opportunity. He pressed close, his voice a drone I couldn't tune out, trapping me against the wood. I looked for an escape, panic rising in my throat. I looked toward the booth, desperate, and saw Remy stand up. She wasn't looking at the partners anymore. She was looking at me, and her expression was terrifyingly possessive. I watched the room from the high-backed booth, nursing a Pinot Noir I didn't want. Corporate celebrations are a specific kind of theater. Sharks in Italian suits and piranhas waiting for a drop of blood. I should have gone home to the cold precision of my apartment. But I stayed because she was there. Freya stood near the bar, looking like a deer deciding whether to bolt or freeze. She was trying to be invisible, pulling her cardigan tighter, her eyes scanning the exits. It was charming, but in this ecosystem, looking like prey is a death sentence. Then, Julian moved. I saw it happen in slow motion. The way he slid into her radius, his posture assuming a familiarity he hadn't earned. He cornered her against the mahogany rail. I saw Freya shrink. It was a subtle movement, a shift of weight, a tuck of the chin, but to me, it was a scream. She looked trapped. And Julian? He looked like he owned the space. He looked like he thought he owned her. Something cold and sharp twisted in my chest. It wasn't professional concern. It wasn't mentorship. It was a primal, ugly spike of jealousy that overrode 15 years of discipline. I didn't decide to stand up. My body simply rejected the image of him touching her. I crossed the room. The sound of my heels on the floorboards cut through the ambient bass. I saw the exact moment Julian realized I was there. His smirk faltered. I slammed my hand on the bar. The vibration rattled the glassware. "She's not here for the paperwork," I said. My voice was lower than usual, stripped of the courtroom polish. "She's here for me." The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. I watched Freya's eyes widen. I had just claimed her. Publicly. Irrevocably. It was a territorial mark dressed up as a rescue, and the terrifying part was that I didn't regret it. I wanted them to know. I wanted him to know. The rush of adrenaline was sharper than any verdict I'd ever won. "Get your coat," I told her. We walked out into the cool San Francisco night, the door swinging shut on the noise and the stairs. The silence on the sidewalk was sudden and loud. Freya was trembling slightly. Cold or adrenaline? I unlocked my car, the chirping sound echoing off the wet pavement. "I can take a cab," she said, though she didn't move toward the street. "Get in." The drive was a steady intention. My car is a sanctuary. Leather, silence, precision engineering. But with Freya in the passenger seat, the atmosphere changed. The air thickened. I could smell her perfume, something floral and understated, warring with the leather scent of the interior. Every time I shifted gears, I felt her gaze on my hand. I drove with deliberate focus, watching the city lights blur into streaks of gold and red, but my awareness was entirely on the woman beside me. "Thank you," she said softly, miles later. "For back there." "Julian is a liability," I said, my voice tight. "I don't tolerate liabilities." It was a deflection. We both knew it. I wasn't protecting the firm's assets. I was protecting mine. And that was the problem. She wasn't mine. "We need to finish the brief on the McKinnon merger," I said, turning the wheel toward the office tower, rising like a needle against the skyline. "The filing deadline is Monday." "It's 1 a.m., Remy. Then we better get started." I didn't look at her, but I felt the shift. She didn't argue. She didn't point out that the brief was already 90% done. She just settled back into the seat, a silent complicity filling the space between us. We were going back to the glass cage. But this time, we would be the only two things inside it. The skyscraper at 2 a.m. feels like being inside a held breath. It's just us. We are seated at the long mahogany table, a surface usually reserved for million-dollar hostile takeovers. Normally, I sit in the far corner, invisible. Now, I'm right beside her. The McKinnon brief is a flimsy shield. We are looking for problems that don't exist just to justify the proximity. But God, even the pretense is intoxicating. Watching Remy work is like watching a master clockmaker dismantling a time bomb. She is precise, ruthless with extraneous words, her gold fountain pen slashing through paragraphs of my draft with a violence that feels strangely like affection. "This citation," she murmurs, the sound of her voice vibrating through the mahogany. She taps the page with a manicured nail. It's weak. The precedent in Vargas v. State is more applicable here. It establishes the intent. Vargas was overturned on appeal in the Second Circuit, I counter, without looking up. my voice steady despite the adrenaline spiking in my blood. If we use it, opposing counsel will shred us on the rebuttal. We need Holloway. It's older, darker, but it held up in the Supreme Court. The silence stretches, sudden and absolute. I freeze, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, realizing I've just corrected Remy Vance. I wait for the ice, for the dismissal, for the reminder of my station. Instead, I hear a soft sound, a pen dropping onto the table. I look up. Remy is watching me, and there is no anger in her face. There is a slow, burning curiosity, a spark. "You're right," she says softly, tilting her head. "You're absolutely right. Holloway is the sharper blade." The praise hits me harder than the gin earlier. It's a drug. The intellectual synergy is a foreplay all its own, a cerebral dance where parry and riposte replace touch. We argue over a clause in the settlement agreement next. My voice rises, passionate, defending my logic. Her eyes track my mouth, dark and unreadable, drinking in the competence I usually have to hide. "Show me," she commands. I pull the laptop closer to the center. She stands up and moves behind my chair. I can feel the heat radiating from her body before she even touches the back of my seat. She leans over my shoulder to look at the screen. Her hand lands on the table next to mine, close enough that our pinky fingers are separated by a molecule of air. The world narrows down to that gap. "Here," I whisper, pointing at the screen, though my hand is shaking. "Subsection C. The language is ambiguous." She leans closer. Her hair, loose now, brushes against my cheek. It's shocking, electric. The scent of sandalwood and rain fills my lungs, drowning out the smell of old paper and anxiety. I stop breathing. I can hear the steady rhythm of her breath near my ear, slow and deliberate. She isn't looking at the screen. I turn my head, just an inch, and suddenly we are face to face. The hierarchy is gone. There is no intern, no partner, just two women suspended in the amber dark. Her gaze drops to my lips, then back up to my eyes. It's a question, a challenge. "Freya," she breathes. The way she says my name, stripped of command, raw, makes my stomach flip. "Remy," I answer, the informality tasting like forbidden fruit. "Why are we here?" "Because," she starts, her voice rough. She leans in. I tilt my chin up, surrendering. My heart is hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I want her to close the distance. I want her to ruin me. Because I couldn't let you go home thinking... Thinking what? Thinking you're just an intern. Her hand moves. She's going to touch me. Her fingers graze my jawline, a ghost of a touch that sets my skin on fire. I lean into it, my eyes fluttering shut. This is it. The line is blurring, breaking. Whirr. The sudden, mechanical roar of a vacuum cleaner shatters the moment like a hammer through glass. We spring apart, stumbling back as if burned. The door swings open, and the night cleaning crew enters, pushing a gray cart. The spell breaks instantly. The cold reality of the office rushes back in. The glass walls, the titles, the impossible distance between her salary and my student loans. Remy straightens her blazer, the mask of the lead attorney sliding back into place with terrifying speed. But I see her hand tremble as she picks up her pen. We survive the night, but the safety is gone. 3 days. That's how long we managed the silence. 3 days of passing each other in the corridor with the polite detachment of strangers, as if we hadn't almost dismantled my career on a mahogany table at 2 a.m. I buried myself in the endless minutiae of the McKinnon merger, turning my office into a fortress. But I could feel her, Freya. She was a ghost in the machine, a presence I tracked without looking up. The click of her heels, the smell of her coffee, the soft murmur of her voice answering the phone. We were leaving a client meeting on the 42nd floor. The client, a pharmaceutical CEO with too much money and zero moral compass, had spent 2 hours posturing. Freya had been brilliant, silent, observant, handing me the exact file I needed before I even asked for it. It was terrifying how well we fit. The lobby was empty. We waited for the car, standing 3 feet apart. The distance felt like a canyon. When the doors slid open, we stepped into the steel box. I pressed the button for the lobby. The doors hissed shut, sealing us in. The air changed instantly. It wasn't just quiet, it was pressurized. I watched the numbers tick down, 40, 39, 38. The reflection in the brushed metal doors showed us standing like statues. I looked at her reflection. She was staring straight ahead, her jaw set, but I saw the pulse fluttering frantically in the hollow of her throat, a betrayal of the body. At the 30th floor, the universe intervened. The elevator shuddered violently, a mechanical hiccup that dropped us a foot before the emergency brakes engaged with a jarring thud. Gravity lurched. Freya stumbled, her heels slipping on the polished floor. I didn't think. I moved. My arm shot out, catching her around the waist, pulling her flush against me to steady her. It was a reflex, a simple act of physics. But the moment she was in my arms, physics dissolved. She gasped, her hands clutching the lapels of my blazer for balance. We stood there, frozen, the hum of the machinery vibrating through the soles of our shoes. I should have let go. The car had stabilized. The danger was over. But I didn't. My hand splayed against the small of her back, burning through the thin silk of her blouse. I felt the heat of her skin, the rapid, staccato beat of her heart against my chest. "Are you all right?" I asked. The words were professional, but my voice was a ruin. Low, rough, stripped of all its careful polish. "I'm fine," she whispered. She didn't pull away. She looked up at me, her eyes wide, dark, searching. The fear from the drop was gone, replaced by a different kind of terror. The terror of wanting. This was the precipice, and God help me, I stepped over it. I didn't release her. Instead, I shifted, stepping into her space, crowding her against the back wall of the car. It was a subtle movement, a claiming. I saw her breath hitch. I saw her pupils dilate. "You should be careful," I murmured, my thumb tracing a slow, deliberate arc against her hip bone. "It's a long way down." It was a double entendre so sharp it could draw blood. I was warning her about the fall, the career suicide, the scandal, the ruin. But I was also promising her the jump. For 10 seconds, we existed in a vacuum. No partners, no interns, no ethics committee, just the heat of her body, the smell of her fear and desire, and the way she leaned into my hand instead of pulling away. I wanted to kiss her. I wanted to taste the panic on her mouth. I wanted to ruin us both, right there between floors 29 and 30. Ping! The sound was a gunshot. The elevator smoothed out, resuming its descent. The spell shattered. We sprang apart just as the doors slid open on the lobby level, revealing the atrium. Moving the deposition prep to her apartment was framed as a necessity. We needed security, silence, and distance from the prying eyes of the associates who had started noticing the way the air changed pressure whenever we stood in the same room. But entering Remy's sanctuary felt like crossing a final, invisible border. I expected her home to be like her office, cold, chrome, a museum of modern achievement. Instead, it was disarming. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the bay, but piles of books lay on the floor. A half-finished bottle of Merlot breathed on the counter, and the soft lighting made her look less like a titan of industry and more like a woman who was simply, humanly, tired. We were hours into the session. The Vanderbilt deposition was the firm's biggest liability, and I was tasked with organizing the defense strategy. Remy played the opposing counsel, grilling me on the timeline. She was relentless. She paced the living room in bare feet, a glass of wine in one hand, stripping away my arguments with surgical precision. "You're evading, Freya," she said, her voice sharp. She turned on her heel, fixing me with that dark, predatory gaze. "If you give that answer in court, they will destroy you. They will find the crack in your confidence and pry it open until you bleed. Again." "I'm not evading," I shot back, frustration spiking. I sat on the plush rug, surrounded by a fortress of manila folders. "I'm protecting the client's privilege. You're protecting yourself. You're scared." She set the wine glass down on the coffee table with a heavy thud. She moved closer, invading my space, looming over me. "Is that the best you can do? Because if it is, We should stop now. Something in me snapped. It was the exhaustion, the wine, the weeks of being treated like glass. I scrambled to my feet to meet her eye to eye. I am not scared of them, I said, my voice shaking with a rage that felt dangerously close to passion. And I'm not scared of you. Remy stopped. The challenge hung in the air between us, vibrating. She looked at me, really looked at me, and the mask of the lead attorney dissolved. Her eyes dropped to my mouth, then back up, dark and dilated. Prove it, she whispered. I didn't think. I couldn't. I closed the distance and kissed her. It wasn't a tentative, testing the waters kiss. It was a collision. I grabbed the lapels of her silk blouse and pulled her in, crashing my mouth against hers. For a second, she froze. Shock, maybe, or a final attempt at control. And then she broke. She made a low, desperate sound in her throat and surged against me. Her hands tangled in my hair, gripping tight, pulling my head back to deepen the angle. We stumbled backward. My back hit the edge of the heavy oak dining table. I didn't care. I hoisted myself up, sweeping a stack of $1,000,000 depositions onto the floor in a chaotic slide of paper. Remy stepped between my legs, her hands roaming over me with a hunger that terrified me. There was no finesse here, no corporate polish. It was messy and urgent. Her mouth was hot, demanding, tasting of wine and control. She kissed my jaw, my throat, biting down on the sensitive spot where my pulse hammered against my skin. Freya, she gasped against my neck, her hands gripping my waist, her thumbs digging into my skin through my shirt. I can't be your boss right now. Then don't be, I breathed, pulling her back to my lips. The rest of the night was a blur of skin and shadows. It was the release of every silent elevator ride, every lingering glance, every moment of professional restraint incinerated by her touch. But when the morning light hit the windows, gray and unforgiving, reality crashed back in. I woke up in her bed, the sheets tangled around my legs, watching the rise and fall of her breathing. The terror hit me then. This wasn't just a hookup. I was in love with her. And in this world, that was the most dangerous thing I could be. The morning after is a study in compartmentalization. I had left Freya sleeping in my bed, a note on the pillow that read, "Lock up when you leave," because I am a coward who hides behind logistics. Leaving her there, warm, tangled in my high thread count sheets, felt like an amputation. But now, standing in the chaos of the Superior Court hallway, I was trying to reconstruct the lead attorney from the wreckage of the woman who had unraveled in her arms 6 hours ago. The suit was my armor, Saint Laurent, sharp enough to cut, black enough to mourn the loss of my professional distance. I moved through the crowd. The corridor was a hive of desperate energy. Lawyers bargaining for plea deals, clients weeping, the stale smell of floor wax and anxiety. Usually, I thrive here. This is my arena. I am the apex predator in this ecosystem. But today, the noise felt abrasive. My skin felt too tight, sensitized, remembering the friction of her hands, the heat of her mouth. Every time my phone buzzed in my pocket, my heart did a traitorous double beat, expecting her. Then I saw her. She was standing near the double doors of Department 4, holding a stack of files against her chest like a shield. She looked exhausted, the dark circles under her eyes visible even under the harsh fluorescent lights. She was talking to Julian, of course. He was leaning in, laughing at something she hadn't said, his hand resting on the wall just above her shoulder. The possessiveness that flared in my chest was immediate and suffocating. It wasn't the cold, sharp jealousy of the bar. This was heavier, darker. It was the territorial instinct of a lover watching someone else touch what belongs to them. I wanted to cross the hall, shove him away, and claim her again. I wanted to kiss the fatigue off her face in front of the bailiffs and the judges and the entire San Francisco Bar Association. I forced myself to walk, one foot in front of the other. Precision. Control. As I approached, Freya's eyes snapped to mine. She stiffened. I saw the flush rise in her cheeks, a vivid betrayal of the memory we were both suppressing. Julian turned, his smile faltering as he saw me. "Miss Vance," he said, straightening up. "We were just—" "I don't care," I said. I didn't stop walking. I cut through the space between them, forcing Julian to step back. As I passed Freya, I slowed, just for a fraction of a second. The air between us charged, thick and magnetic. I could smell the lingering trace of my own shampoo in her hair. It was intoxicating. I leaned in, ostensibly to check the file in her hand, but my voice dropped to a whisper only she could hear. "Stop looking at me like that," I murmured, the command rough around the edges. "Unless you want me to ruin you, right here." Her breath hitched. I didn't wait for a response. I kept moving, the adrenaline flooding my system like a drug. It was reckless. It was insane. And I loved it. "Vance." The voice was like a bucket of ice water. I turned. Robert Sterling, the senior naming partner, was standing by the water fountain. He was a man who saw everything and said very little, which made him terrifying. "Robert," I said, my mask sliding back into place, "the deposition went well." "I'm sure it did." He studied me, his gaze lingering on the flush I couldn't quite suppress. "You're walking a fine line, Remy. The associates look up to you. They emulate you." He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. "Don't give them a reason to look away. Distraction is the enemy of excellence." He walked away, leaving me cold. He knew. Or he suspected. It didn't matter. The warning was clear. Protect the firm, protect the brand. I went into the courtroom, argued a motion, and won. I did my job. But all day, my mind was a riot. I was addicted to her. The way she challenged me, the way she yielded, the terrifying vulnerability of her sleeping face. I knew I had to stop. I knew the ethics, the risks, the sheer stupidity of it. But knowing the stove is hot doesn't stop you from burning if you're freezing to death. That night, my phone lit up in the dark of my empty apartment. A single message from Freya. "What are we?" I stared at the screen, the cursor blinking, mocking my silence. The silence following my text message was a physical weight. I stared at my phone until the screen blurred. The 3 words, "What are we?" hanging there like an unanswered prayer. Remy didn't reply. Not that night, not the next morning. When I walked into the office on Monday, the atmosphere had shifted tectonically. The heat that had crackled between us in the elevator, the raw vulnerability of her apartment, it was all gone. In its place was a wall of terrifying, professional ice. Remy Vance had rebuilt her fortress, and I was standing on the outside, shivering. She didn't look at me. During the morning briefing, she looked through me. Her voice was sharp, efficient, dismantling arguments with that lethal precision I used to admire. Now, it just felt like a weapon. I was back to being furniture. I was back to being the intern who fetched coffee and organized files. Only now, I carried the ghost of her touch on my skin. Every time she walked past my desk, leaving a trail of sandalwood in her wake, my heart would lurch, expecting a glance, a whisper, a signal. There was nothing. Just the click of her heels and the devastating silence of a door closing. Then came the voices. The break room is the true courtroom of any law firm. It's where reputations are prosecuted without a defense. I was making tea, trying to steady my shaking hands, when Julian walked in with a senior associate I barely knew. They didn't see me behind the espresso machine. "She's riding the intern hard on the McKinnon files," Julian laughed, the sound grating. "Vance always picks a pet project. Remember the associate from tax law 2 years ago? Burned him out in 6 months and moved on. She feeds on the fresh meat, uses up their energy, and then discards the husk. She's brilliant, though," the other man shrugged. "Brilliance requires fuel." "She's a machine," Julian corrected. "Machines don't have favorites. They just have parts they haven't worn out yet." I stood frozen, the hot water burning my hand. Fuel. Parts. Pet project. The words settled into my stomach like lead. Was that it? Was the deposition prep, the elevator, the way she looked at me like I was the only person in the world, was that just her extracting value? Was I just a battery she was draining before tossing aside? The thought was nauseating. It turned the memory of her kiss from something sacred into something cheap. I wasn't her partner. I was a statistic in the break room gossip mill. I couldn't be the secret she kept in the dark and the stranger she ignored in the light. I had to breathe. I typed the transfer request with fingers that felt numb. Request for reassignment. Antitrust division. It was a step down. It was professional suicide to leave the lead attorney's desk mid-case. But staying felt like emotional suicide. I printed the page. It was still warm when I walked to her office. I knocked. Enter. Her voice was neutral, detached. I walked in. She was reading a brief, her glasses perched on the end of her nose. She didn't look up. I need your signature on this, I said, placing the paper on the mahogany desk. Remy looked at the page. I saw her eyes scan the text. Reassignment. For a second, just a fraction of a heartbeat, the mask slipped. Her hand stilled, her jaw tightened, a small muscle jumping beneath the skin. She looked up at me then, and her eyes were dark, swirling with something that looked like anger, or maybe pain. You're leaving the team, she stated. It wasn't a question. I think it's for the best, I said, my voice steady despite the fact that I was breaking apart inside. I think my skill set is better suited elsewhere. Your skill set is perfect here, she said quietly. But if you can't handle the pressure... It's not the pressure, I cut in, reckless. It's the silence. Her gaze hardened. The vulnerability vanished, replaced by the unflinching coldness of the lead attorney. She picked up her pen, the same gold pen she'd used to correct my brief that night, and signed the paper with a sharp, aggressive slash of ink. Done, she said, sliding it back to me. Close the door on your way out. I walked out of her office, my legs shaking. I had escaped. So why did it feel like I had just lost everything? The next week was a blur of gray. The antitrust division was in the basement, a windowless box filled with people who love spreadsheets more than arguments. I worked, went home, and stared at my ceiling, missing the adrenaline, the stakes, and her. The office felt like a cage now. I saw Remy once, from a distance, walking toward the elevators. She looked impeccable, untouchable. She didn't turn her head. Then the envelope landed on my new, smaller desk. Heavy cream cardstock, embossed with gold leaf. The annual firm gala, attendance mandatory. It was an invitation to the one place where the hierarchy was dressed in silk and champagne. The inevitable collision course I had been trying to outrun. The Fairmont Ballroom was a suffocating cage of gold leaf and bad intentions. I stood near a marble pillar, clutching a flute of champagne, watching the firm's annual display of power. This was the theater of corporate law, a room full of people who would sue their own mothers, pretending to enjoy each other's company. I hated the noise, the posturing, the endless cycle of, "Remy, darling, you look tired." I wasn't tired. I was starving. A hollowed-out shell staring at a signed transfer form and an empty desk. Then the room shifted. It wasn't a sound. It was a silence that rippled outward from the entrance, a collective intake of breath. I looked toward the grand staircase. Freya stood at the top. The breath left my lungs in a rush, a physical blow that nearly doubled me over. She wasn't wearing the sensible blazers or the cardigans she used to shield herself in the office. She was wearing a gown of liquid silver that clung to her, exposing the slope of her neck and the devastating line of her back. She didn't look like an intern. She didn't look like a subordinate. She looked like a weapon. For a week, I had convinced myself she was just a distraction, a momentary lapse in judgment I could correct with distance. Seeing her now descending the stairs, I realized I hadn't been distracted. I had been dismantled. She reached the floor, and the sharks began to circle. I watched, my grip on the glass tightening until I feared it would shatter. A partner from Davis & White, a man I had beaten in court 3 times, a man who represented everything shallow about this city, intercepted her. He smiled, that oily, practiced smile, and leaned in close. Freya laughed. She threw her head back, exposing the column of her throat, and laughed at something he said. She looked free. She looked happy. And she wasn't looking for me. The jealousy was a cold, black tide rising in my throat. The precision I prided myself on was gone. The control vaporized. I moved. I didn't care about the optics. I didn't care about Robert Sterling watching from the corner with his hawk-like gaze. I cut through the crowd like a knife, my gown rustling like a warning. I reached them just as the partner placed a hand on her arm. "Excuse us," I said, my voice low and lethal. I didn't wait for a response. I didn't wait for the partner to stutter his surprise. I took Freya's elbow, my touch burning even through the silk, and steered her toward the balcony doors. She didn't resist, but her body was rigid. We stepped out into the night air. It was freezing, a sharp contrast to the stifling heat of the ballroom. I released her, stepping back before I did something reckless. She turned, her expression guarded, her eyes hard. "Ms. Vance," she said. The formality stung. "What are you doing, Freya?" I demanded, the words tumbling out. "Networking," she replied coolly, crossing her arms. "Isn't that what interns are supposed to do? Or am I only allowed to speak when spoken to?" "You're provoking me." "I'm existing, Remy. There's a difference." She turned to look out at the city lights. "I transferred. I'm out of your sight. Isn't that what you wanted?" "No," I whispered. The word cost me everything. The armor cracked. "No, it is not what I wanted." She froze. She turned back to me, searching my face. "Then why did you sign the paper?" "Because I am terrified," I admitted. "My life is built on precision, Freya, on control. And you are chaos. The silence, the empty desk, the way I look for you in every room. It's unbearable." She stepped closer, drawn by the confession. "That's not enough," she said, her voice trembling. "I won't do this again. I won't be the mistake you regret in the morning." She stepped into my space, close enough that I could smell her perfume. "I can't be your secret in the dark and your stranger in the light, Remy. I won't be." She waited for me to speak, to bridge the gap, to claim her in the light. But I stood frozen, paralyzed by fear. "That's what I thought," she whispered. She turned and walked back inside, leaving me alone. I watched the balcony doors swing shut, the heavy glass vibrating from the force of her exit. The silence she left behind was louder than the jazz quartet, louder than the polite clinking of crystal flutes. Robert Sterling was watching me from across the room, his eyebrow raised in a silent, warning question. For 15 years, that look would have frozen me in place. It would have sent me retreating into the safety of my ambition. But tonight, looking at the empty space where Freya had just stood, the safety felt like a coffin. I turned my back on the partners. I turned my back on the networking, the politics, and the terrifying perfection of my career. I ran. Outside, the sky had finally broken open. The rain was coming down in sheets, turning the city into a blur of gray and neon. I found her half a block away, struggling to hail a cab. The rain was freezing, soaking through the silver silk of my dress in seconds, but I barely felt it. I was numb. I stood on the corner, shivering violently, trying to signal a taxi, while tears mixed with the rain on my face. I had done it. I had walked away. It was the right thing to do, the smart thing to do. So why did it feel like I was bleeding out? "Freya, stop!" The voice tore through the sound of traffic. I spun around. Remy was running toward me, her heels slipping on the wet pavement, her hair plastered to her face. She looked wild. She looked nothing like the lead attorney. "Go back inside, Remy," I yelled, my voice cracking. "Go back to your glass tower. You'll catch a cold out here with the mortals." "I don't care about the cold!" She caught up to me, breathless, reaching for my arm. I stepped back, putting distance between us. "Don't," I warned. "Don't touch me unless you mean it. I am done being your dirty little secret. I am done being the intern you regret in the morning." "I never regretted you," Remy said, stepping closer, ignoring the mud splashing her gown. "I regretted everything else. I regretted every moment I spent building a life that didn't have room for this. For us." "For what?" I demanded, hugging myself. "For a scandal? For an HR violation?" "For you," she said. Her voice was steady, cutting through the storm. "I spent 15 years building a fortress so no one could touch me. I thought power was safety. But it's just a cage, Freya. And I don't want the view from the top if I have to stand there alone." I stared at her. The anger in my chest wavered. "You love your job, Remy. It's who you are." "It's what I do," she corrected. She took my face in her hands. Her skin was freezing, but the heat between us was instant. "It is not who I am. Not anymore." "What about the firm?" I whispered. What about the rules? We'll face them, she promised, her thumb stroking the rain from my cheeks. I'll disclose. I'll recuse myself. I'll fight the board if I have to. But I am not letting you get in that cab. I am done hiding. A car drove past, headlights illuminating us, exposing us to the street. Remy didn't flinch. She didn't look away. She just looked at me. Okay, I breathed. She didn't wait. She kissed me. It wasn't the desperate hidden kiss of the deposition. It was a claiming. She kissed me in the pouring rain, on a public street, indifferent to the world. Her mouth was wet and cold, but inside was a fire that burned through the chill. I pulled her flush against me, gripping her waist, knowing that whatever storm came next, we would weather it together. 3 weeks later, the office door clicked shut. The blinds were drawn. I sat on the edge of Remy's desk, watching her review the disclosure forms we were about to file with HR. She looked up, her glasses sliding down her nose, a smile playing on her lips that the partners never saw. You know, she murmured, pulling me between her knees. I'm not here for the paperwork. I grinned, leaning down to meet her. I know. You're here for me. If this story raised your pulse, subscribe for more. Tell me in the comments, would you risk your career for this kind of connection?